Whenever there's a situation where inanimate objects are used to inflict harm on mass groups of people, this conversation rears its head. A lot of it is coming from a good place and virtue signaling, but it doesn't really count all the variables and all the facts. And so I wanted to highlight something from Breaking Points, which is one of my best sources for information, not in the sense that it was a political aspect, because I actually don't think this is political. I think this is more humanitarian, sounds weird, but definitely a human issue, unless of a political one. The issue of the inanimate objects that we can't say, because if we say, YouTube will ether this video, but we all know what we're talking about. It's on the screen right there, all right? And this is Sagar from Breaking Points, and he's going to present some very interesting facts and some logical conclusions that don't really work for anybody in this equation. And then I'm going to give you an additional stat that'll blow your mind if you stay till the very end. Go ahead.
Hear the same response from our media and the Democratic establishment. Need more gun control. Control is the only answer. President Biden is nearly on repeat with it after a spate of mass shootings in recent months, and you get basically the same treatment from the media. I want to also acknowledge that a lot of people who watch the show probably agree with that. But something I've always tried so hard to emphasize here is it's just not that easy. If it was, then we would have done it already. It's not a matter of the NRA or the lobby. It has to do with our Constitution, the Second Amendment, a right to self-defense, and ultimately a level of authority that we are willing to provide our government over our lives. In my estimation, the gun debate has amounted to this. Mass shootings are seen uniquely, maybe rightfully, as the most visible, sick, and American unique phenomenon. That has been conflated, though, somehow publicly with all violence in the eyes of the non-voting public. So let's start with a review of what I've always touched on in the past. Mass shootings, what are they and what are they not? If you don't follow this much, you probably would be forgiven for thinking that mass shooting statistics cited by the media entail school shootings just occurred like at the mall in Allen, Texas. The actual definition, though, is actually up to the government. And when the government is involved, then you already know that politics is involved. President Obama actually forced the FBI in 2013 to adopt this definition: a single attack in which 3 or more victims are killed. On its face, I guess it sounds reasonable. But is it? Consider U.S. firearm homicides and the type that they are involved in. Mass shooting accounts for only 0.1% of all deaths. Sadly, the vast majority of homicides, especially those that involve 3 or more people, are those that involve a family member or an acquaintance or by an intimate partner.
Did you guys know that? I don't think most people know that, because that word is thrown around and like, this is so sick. We're such a country and it's like, well, it's such a small percentage of all overall violence in that regard, but then it's even a smaller percentage because it actually isn't defined the way you think it happens. When they're like, whatever they say, every minute there's a mass shooting or whatever crazy statistic they give.
Yeah.
And so it's like that. One, that's not true. 2, it's actually a domestic issues.
At the drive-by.
People people that know each other.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so the framing of it is so interesting in how it's been framed. It's not actually accurate. You know what I mean? Go ahead.
A stranger killing another stranger is only about 25% of all homicide, and that is almost all crime. Furthermore,
that's crazy. So a strangers is only 25% of all homicides, and homicides are a very small percentage of this.
I think he was saying this is of stranger on stranger is 25% of all pew-pew violence.
Yes.
And that 25%...
No, of homicide pew-pew violence.
Of homicide pew-pew violence.
Which is an important distinction.
Yep, which is an important distinction. And that 25% equates for pretty much 100% of the crime.
Yep.
Like all these other ones are like accidents.
Yep. Hey, did you know that you can watch videos like this on the Spotify app? We now are on Spotify under Ruslan Bless God Podcast. So if you're driving and you want to go back and forth between listening to the podcast and just the audio or watching the video, consider doing it now on the Spotify app, as well as all podcast platforms. All right, I'll see you over there.
Weapons do they use? When we hear calls for gun control, they are obviously focusing on assault weapons bans. Here too, data is important. Handguns alone account for 56% of all homicides. If you include their involvement with a rifle, you would actually add a further 24%. A so-called handgun ban is really the only type of ban which would work somewhat.
That's facts. The Uvalde person had my handgun. And I'm like, oh, look at
the logical conclusion of any talk with regards to controlling of these inanimate object is an all-out ban.
Oh, 100%.
And if you don't understand that, then you're not really ready to engage in the conversation. Now, if you don't understand why that's not going to work here, then you're just unaware of the reality of where we are, what is this right, and how does it flesh out practically. And so Sagar is going to explain that for us.
And nobody proposes that. Why? Because it's completely unconstitutional. In fact, as I've laid here before, there's absolutely zero statistical evidence to say that an assault weapons ban would have any impact whatsoever on mass shootings. The other pet policy proposal of the establishment and the media is a high-capacity magazine ban, the theory being that shooters would need to pause and to reload. This would allow first responders critical moments, as well as reduce the initial amount of deaths. Again, though, here's the thing. There is no statistical evidence on a societal-wide scale that this would have any impact on mass shootings.
That's pretty much California.
Yeah.
Yeah, California's already got all this stuff.
And they still keep happening here.
Yeah.
Right?
Some's happening here.
No, we had one recently. We had like one last year.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, I think we actually
It was a church out here in Los Angeles that it happened with.
Yep.
And we have the strictest laws.
Provide empathy for people who think all of this stuff will work, because I really do understand how one could be led to believe it. It takes an undue amount of research for the average citizen to see the actual facts surrounding this issue. The facts aside, I think what the gun debate does more than anything is show how much we are talking past each other and how little that we really understand our own countrymen. Ownership is probably one of the best identifiers in America today for party identification. Consider this map side by side from 2016. On the left is what the Electoral College would look like if only people who didn't own a gun were voters. As you can see, every single state, save for one, would go for Hillary. On the right is what the map would look like if only people who voted who had guns had in 2016. Trump would win all but one state. That about says it all, doesn't it? Gun owners and non-gun owners are completely at odds politically. But what I would argue is it's downstream from culture. For the non-gun owners, guns are inexorably linked to violence, both by the state and by criminals, including mass shootings. Connotations around them are dark, better left unsaid. In most cases, outside the realm of polite society. Banning them seems just like the easiest option.
Right.
Any discussion of the Second Amendment sounds ludicrous to this person. For owners, it's the opposite. Certainly,
and that's a lot of folks in the chat, like a lot of folks that watch the videos, like, yo, what do you mean? Like, why do we need them? You know, they'll pull the Christian pacifist card, turn the other cheek. And folks have jumped out the window and said wild stuff, all the way down to the extreme example of like, if someone comes in and wants to attack you in your home, you should let them if you love Jesus.
Crazy.
Like, we've had folks say that in the chat.
Yeah. Or you get the people from the other countries that are like, your American obsession with these inanimate objects is insane. They cause so much. I was like, all right, well, let's check your guys' problems. Is your violence completely gone?
Right.
Or does it look like knives? Do you guys have knife regulations?
Right.
If you have knife regulations, you cannot comment about gun control.
Yep.
I'm sorry. That's the standard.
Yep.
If your country has a knife regulation, you don't get to comment about this.
Someone said, shotgun saved my life. The threat, I didn't have to kill anybody. The threat was a deterrent.
But there are also other things that have nothing to do with violence, like hunting or bonding with family members, recreation, as a tool, sometimes self-defense. Much of this, too, comes from a rural and an urban divide. When you're out in the middle of the country, you're 45 minutes from authorities, possibly without cell service, the ability to defend yourself either from another person or from a wild animal actually becomes very much more acute compared to a city where the response time is less than 10 minutes from authorities and people are literally everywhere.
It's a good point. That rural life is different.
Oh, yeah.
That rural life is way different. And so he's getting at something here that is just a cultural disconnect. My God can be the for a lot of us. Yeah. And then there's just like impractical stuff, right? Like that.
All right.
Like,
see how that works out for you.
And it's like, yeah. And like you could also like not have a bank account. You could also not, right? Like,
my God is my job.
My God is my, right? And so I think that's the issue is the right to defend yourself with whatever tool you have access to, is that a human right? And I would say unequivocally yes. Hey, you want to see something kind of crazy? Over 75% of the people that watch this channel are not subscribed. Please consider subscribing and turning your bell notification on so that you don't miss anything we have going here. And then if you can have access to a tool that makes it more efficient, and it's in our Constitution, the Constitution protects the right to defend yourself, then what we're really talking about is removing said rights from certain people, which I think is...
In these cases, you can see why the other would react viscerally around the gun debate to each other, and how the lived reality of both on a day-to-day basis clashes so hard with others. Personally, I think it's important to look at things this way, and especially to the metropolitan group, who overwhelmingly hold the view of more control. When you say things like the Second Amendment shouldn't apply today, because there's no way that the founders could have predicted AR-style rifles or high-capacity magazines, it actually kind of opens up some dangerous ground legally. Imagine if someone stated that because the internet didn't exist in 1787, that freedom of speech or freedom of the press should not apply there, or that the Fourth Amendment right to search and seizure did not apply to cars because they also are newer inventions. In both cases, it would be ridiculous because we understand the Constitution as a set of principles laid out to apply to a dynamic and changing nation, which we can rely on to give us even in the face of unprecedented societal and technological change. Now, to the extent that there is a policy solution...
That's heat.
So the idea that, well, they didn't know that we'd have these styles of weapons and these many bullets and this and this and that and the other, which, by the way, who do you think is producing those? It's not the government. It's actually private corporations. The government's not producing tanks. They're hiring private corporations that could have these weapons, but the civilians can't, right? The reason why, quote unquote, a weapon ban wouldn't work, and I see you in the chat, apologetics, is because it's already illegal to have an automatic weapon.
Yes.
So when people are speaking about these things, they're actually ignorant what they're speaking about. What you don't know is that the typical firearm you can get, a hand firearm versus a assault weapon, they actually discharge bullets at the same rate.
Yep.
So when you hear assault rifle, people are envisioning movie.
Yeah.
That's actually not what's happening. They fire the same way. The reason why there's no evidence for research that shows that an assault weapon ban will reduce these situations is there's not a single law that's been proposed that can remove these situations from happening, because most of them could have happened with a handgun.
Yep.
Right? So Zach just pulled it up. An AR-15 actually stands for Armalite Rifle, and AR-15 is most commonly used to refer to the civilian semi-automatic, which, if you don't know what a handgun is, it is a what? Semi-automatic. Say it with me, so that we're talking about the same thing.
Yep.
This fires the same way at the same number of bullets, different caliber of bullets. The bullet could do more damage as a Glock, as a revolver is the one that is not semi-automatic.
So the important distinction here is everyone thinks AR stands for assault rifle, which automatically, like, if they named it assault rifle, it must be horrifying. What was it? It's Armalite Rifle. Yep. That was the name of it. And it says most commonly used to refer only to the civilian semi-automatic variant of the rifle, which lacked the fully automatic function. So catch this. The AR-15 is a civilian weapon. It was specifically designed to be a civilian weapon that is the civilian version of the M4, which our beloved Army uses. And that's an automatic weapon. Right. That's an assault.
Right. So you can't, we already have those banned.
This is already the civilian version.
You guys
this
understand
is the
that, right?
version.
Like, yeah, you guys are, so again, a lot of this is spoken from ignorance. You cannot have an automatic weapon. You can't walk into a gun store and buy what the government has access to. That we're not using weapons of war.
Yeah.
They're literally not that. It's a rifle that shoots like a handgun.
Most police departments don't even provide AR-15s for their officers. A lot of them have to go and actually buy them themselves.
Why?
Police departments are cheap, but like you have to buy it as a civilian, and then you can get clearance to use it on duty. So like you ban AR-15s, they don't produce AR-15s anymore. It would probably be added to a roster that officers could then buy, but still it would be more difficult. There would be less production. And then also, like, our forefathers, they used military grade weapons. And that's what they wrote into the Second Amendment. Right. So the government wasn't using a semi-automatic musket, and they had to use the one where you put the
right. It wasn't a
bullet.
Yeah.
They had access to the most current, most effective firearm. We should be able to use this. So the logical conclusion is not that we should just keep these as muskets. It's that, we actually need to stay on tier with the level of growth and usage that the government is using, because possibilities of tyranny.
Sure. And by the way, you know who doesn't follow gun laws? Bad guys.
Yeah.
You know who will go out and get an automatic Uzi? Bad guys. You know who won't? Guys like me and Zach that are like, freak, man, we're in California. We got to follow. We got this
I was like, dag, it's like $1,000 to get my concealed carry. So I guess I'm just not going to carry a gun anymore.
We got a bunch of hoops we got to jump through. The ARs aren't the same. You got a magazine limit in terms of, right? And so that's the issue, is the bad guys will get the actual automatic Dracos. That doesn't fire the same way.
And you know who has some of the strongest laws in the United States?
New York City, Los Angeles, and Chicago.
Chicago, at the very top.
Yep.
Chicago.
Chicago.
Guess who's got the most violence in the United States?
Chicago.
even in the face of unprecedented societal and technological change. Now, to the extent that there is a policy solution, it must come from a deeper and multifaceted understanding of the problem, from loneliness, identity politics, and the litany of social ills that seem to have manifest in this sick freak in Texas. In other words, it won't be easy, but that doesn't mean that we still don't have to deal with it.
And I'll just give you guys one stat that'll hopefully make it all make sense for you. In the 1950s, there was 500,000 people committed to mental treatment facilities. 500,000, 500,000 people. In the 1980s, there was 100,000.
Wow. So 400,000 less.
Not counting for the population increase that happened from 1950 to 1980. So what we saw happen is we saw laws change on the books about how you can commit someone in terms of a mental these mental areas, and the laws changed to say you could only commit someone if they are a bodily threat to themselves or someone else, not if they can't care for themselves, not if they're acting erratic, none of those things. And so there was an overcorrection that happened with the mental health laws that was attempting to give people more bodily autonomy, because I'm sure if you're going through a psychotic episode, the last thing you want to do is be committed to a mental health institution.
Yeah.
But in that, the floodgates opened up a lot of people that probably should have been committed.
Yeah.
Against their will, and they weren't no longer. And so 1950, 500,000 people committed to mental health institutions. 1980, 100,000.
That's crazy.
I'm not trying to oversimplify it. It's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
Hey, this is a segment from our daily after party stream. Consider partnering with us online for as little as $5 a month to get access to these daily after party streams completely unedited. You'll also get access to our podcast as they are streamed live into the community before anyone else gets to see them, get to interact with our guests, get access to our private Discord server, and a discount code for our store for as little as $5 a month. Ultimately, that will help towards helping us continue contextualizing the gospel using media and podcast here on YouTube. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.